I'm going to get to the main lecture today, which is, of course, on the continuation of ancient China. I'm mostly going to talk about the rise of the Chinese Empire, which starts under the Qin Dynasty, which was the one that started building the Great Wall of China a long time ago, over 2,000 years. I'll also talk about the Han Dynasty, the Tang Dynasties as well that followed, which is like the so-called Golden Age of China, they call it as well. Now, I'll kind of touch base on later China, like the later history of China up to modern times, just briefly about that as well. So if you have any, comments, questions about this lecture during the live stream, of course, do let me know, or you can always leave comments on my channel. Or also, students can also leave comments, don't forget, in Canvas discussions online. So anyway, the Chinese Empire, it started about 2,200 something years ago. Would be the time period about when it began overall. So I'll kind of put it roughly, I think about the 3rd century BC is when it actually begins in ancient China. I talked about this before, but it had to do with the Warring States period, which started back in the 5th century BC. It went on for something like 2.5 centuries in China, where all these different states kind of fought it out because of the fact that the Zhou dynasty had declined. And of course, they had this kingdom called Qin, so they pronounce it also Qin as well. And it basically conquered all the other states and formed what became known as Imperial China, where China, of course, is ruled by, emperors afterwards. So yeah, they call it different names. You can see Qin is the common name, or Qin. I think I've mentioned this before, but Qin is kind of where you get the term China from. So it's kind of derived from this dynasty over time. It's a very short-lived dynasty. They're only around for a few years, or at least as emperors, they're only around for about 15 years. The dynasty itself goes back to about 246 BC, when it was originally a kingdom. But this ruler here, which we've talked about before, Qin Shi Huang, he was, of course, considered the one that really started the actual Chinese Empire. He's the one that's the first emperor of China. In fact, it's usually kind of seen as, I guess, part of his name, Wang, or also they spell it different ways. You'll see Qin Shi Huang or Wang Di, so it's spelled or said different ways, the way it's kind of written. But he's the ruler that actually unified the states together. They think he was some kind of Chinese general and king of the Qin state. And the Qin state would eventually end up defeating all the other states in that Warring States period, because we had talked about how back in the spring and autumn period, you had this deal where the Zhou dynasty, its empire declined. It broke up into these multiple states during the spring and autumn period. Those are all the states that were part of it. I think at one point they had kind of a list of them right here. Those are the major states that were part of it, that were kind of involved in the Warring States. There were other ones too, but Qin, Qi, Chu, Yan. They had another one called Jin as well, and Jin broke up into 3 other states called Han, Zhao, and Wei. And so most of those, fought for control over China at one point. But you can see that one right there, which is Qin, just more to the far west. That's the one that would go on to conquer all the other states, of course, in these series of wars, so-called Qin Wars of Unification or Conquest, it's nicknamed, or the so-called period of Warring States, of course, for short. Here's another map right there. The Qin state, the kingdom, was based around the Wei River, which is kind of like a tributary of the Yellow River. They have a capital I'll get to later called Zian or Xianyang. It's dubbed. And that state will eventually defeat all the other ones. I want to say Chu, which is on the bottom. That one was probably the most powerful one and largest of the rival states. Qin would defeat that one and all the other ones and gobble up all the states into one unified empire afterwards. But here's a map showing you like at one point where the Qin state is. So you can see this particular state is mostly in the eastern part of China. And I think at one point you can see it controlled part of Manchuria, where North Korea is, or close to. And you can see it went up to where the Great Wall is and came down to where the South China Sea is at one point. And then later China, like under the Han Dynasty, they'll push westward toward where the Gobi Desert is, where you see that western part of it at the top. And so China will start expanding westward, but that doesn't happen until the Han come in. Han Dynasty, of course, comes in a little later. Now, of course, one of the most famous things that I did want to talk about today that the Qin Dynasty is well known for. They're famous for, building the Great Wall of China. And that's one thing that Qin Shi Huang is very famous, where he's the one who constructed the Great Wall of China starting sometime in the 3rd century BC. And part of why he did that, and he also built a network of road systems. That's another thing, I guess, that Qin Shi Huang did as emperor overall. And I guess in a sense that the Great Wall of China was too. It was actually a road system that ran east to west off their northern border as well. And as you saw in the video, that the actual early Great Wall of China was not built with like brick, which you'll see later in that documentary I'll share with you later in the week. The Ming Dynasty would later construct most of it using like brick, but early stone walls were constructed out of using like rammed earth, or I guess we call baked mud or sun-baked mud. And so the early walls were kind of primitive in construction. Of course, you can see images of the Great Wall, which are right here. There's reasons why I'll kind of get to the Great Wall of China, about why they constructed, but it's actually a linear fortress is what it basically is, because it stretches, across the northern border of China, between, I guess, China and Mongolia toward the north. And it starts where the Yellow Sea in North Korea is, close to where the Yalu River is, in like close to North Korea. And it goes westward all the way in northern China into the Gobi Desert. And I've got like other images which are right here. So yeah, it's a military structure that they constructed to defend their northern border. I'll get to in a second, but part of why they built it was to defend the northern border from barbarians that were attacking into China from where Mongolia or the Mongolian steppe is. And it's a series of walls that were built over a long time. So this is built like from the time of like Qin's dynasty up to the Ming Dynasty, which is something like almost 2,000 years that they were constructing a lot of these fortifications. Some of the fortifications even went back to the time of like the Warring States period. The average length varies. I think the total length you see is over 6,000 kilometers, which that's about almost like 4,000 or 5,000 miles is about the range of it, of the Great Wall of China. Although they think all the walls, I think, are even longer than that. I think there's a story where, or at least they talk about it sometimes, that all the walls they built could stretch from the North Pole to the South Pole. All the construction that was done over like 2,000 years. It does have it has different names. The actual nickname of the wall that the Chinese sometimes call it is Wan Li Chang Qing, which was different translations of it. But sometimes it means 10,000 li long wall. In fact, quite often they will say it's the long wall. was the nickname. And supposedly it means something like 5,000-kilometer long wall is the translation of it. But I think it's more or less that's how long it is from east to west across its northern border. But the Great Wall itself is it kind of snakes around like a dragon. It's not straight because of the mountains, the way they curve. But also they say that the Chinese didn't build the wall straight because they were superstitious about straight lines and all that. So that's kind of the name. They have other names. Of course, they sometimes call the wall later. Of course, besides Long Wall, they do call it sometimes later the Wall of Death because it was believed that thousands of workers were used to build the Great Wall. And when they died, they would bury them either in the wall or near the wall. So they sometimes call it that, or they joke that it's the longest cemetery on Earth. Although they've never really found actually bodies inside the wall. I think that's kind of a myth about that story. They also call it the Wall of Genghis Khan because after the Mongols broke through the wall into China, the Ming constructed this new brick wall, fortification to keep out the Mongols. So they got that name. It was also called later as well. The Great Wall, I think, is more of a modern name. It's more what the Europeans, when they came to China, gave it, of course, later. Of course, it was built primarily because of these peoples called the Xiongnu. The Xiongnu were these nomadic peoples of the Mongolian steppe that lived above China. And they were great horse archers using like composite bow and spear and I guess swords. And so they were a major threat to China at the time. And so they've been often compared to the Huns later. The Huns that attacked India, attacked Europe, maybe descendants of like Attila the Hun, you see later at the end of the Roman Empire. And I think they think they're ancestors of the Mongols as well, somehow related to them overall. And so that's part of why the Chinese constructed the Great Wall of China in the end because of this threat from the north. So here's kind of a map of where the Xiongnu were, right above. That's a later map of the Han Empire, which would fight them later a lot. And so, yeah, they were considered a threat. And of course, over time, the Mongols will get more powerful, by the early 13th century, they'll attack China and break through the wall, and conquer China at one point. Here's another map of the Great Wall, which is right there. It's believed the Mongols broke through somewhere later above Beijing, where Beijing is, they broke through some of the walls right there, or some even probably went around the wall as well, because they're mobile forces on horseback. But the wall has only been breached twice, the 13th century by the Mongols, and then later by the Manchu in the 17th century, which I think when they broke through the Manchu in the 17th century, they just let them in because there was some kind of civil war that was going on. Yeah, I can see right there. So it goes like close to where the Yellow Sea and very, very, very close to the North Korean border. It's where it starts. Then you can see it snakes its way westward north of Beijing and then goes all the way westward towards where the Gobi Desert is. But I think across from like where Gobi Desert to the Yellow Sea, it's about 3,000 to 4,000 miles, like straight across. Here's another map, of course, showing you, of course, of the Great Wall of China. Here's other pictures of the Great Wall. The average height of the Great Wall, by the way, if you want statistics on it, it's about 25 feet wide. 25 feet high, which I guess if you want meters, 8 meters high, about how tall it is. And the average width is about maybe 15 feet. I think it varies. Some of the walls, 15, 20 feet at the most. So if you want meters, it's about 4 or 5 meters. And you see some images where they have like the watchtowers. They think along the Great Wall, there's about 25,000 watchtowers that were built along the wall to where they had housed troops to well, I guess, watch over the wall in case they get attacked. And they even built beacon towers that stretch out like north of the actual wall to try and warn the wall if they're going to be attacked by Xiongnu or other forces that are a threat from the north. So yeah, there you can see how the wall kind of snakes its way, up and down the mountains. You can see how it's, like I said, the walls aren't straight or anything like that. Yeah, here's some other views, of course, of the watchtowers, which are right there. You can see. You'll notice, like, sometimes on the walls, we'll have holes in the walls. Later, of course, the Chinese, if you know about this, were known for developing like bombs and grenades. That would be used to throw bombs out at the enemy, like that are kind of below trying to attack the wall. They could blow them up. And they even had a deal where they would sometimes set bombs on the ground. Like had booby traps where forces came close to the wall, they could trigger them and blow them up and stuff like that. Of course, I did want to also talk about Xi'an. That, of course, was the capital of the actual Qin or Qin state. That, of course, was founded in the 3rd century. It has different names. They call it Xi'an or Xi'an Yang as well. And then later, by the Tang Dynasty, it was called Chang'an, which I think is its traditional name that it's often nicknamed. And I think at first the city's kind of small, like under the Qin and under the Han Dynasty, maybe 200,000-300,000 lived there. But by the time you get to the Tang Dynasty, it becomes one of the first million-man cities built in the world. Like over something like 1 to 2 million people live there at one point. And it is very famous for his tomb that he constructed there, which is the tomb of Qin Shi Huang, where he was built this huge mausoleum to guard him in the afterlife. And they think it looked like if you look at that image there, it looked like a pyramid. I think the way it was kind of constructed at one point. And on the inside, it had some kind of model of the actual city of Xi'an at the time. Which had supposedly had some kind of lake of mercury that it was kind of built around, almost kind of like booby trapped inside or something like that. And if you know about his tomb, he built this famous army inside of it that was called the Terracotta Army, which was they think something like 700,000 workers built this mausoleum that was used to kind of protect him in the afterlife. And the Terracotta Army was a collection of these sculptures of, like, I guess, his soldiers that were part of his armies at the time. And supposedly a lot of the actual soldiers you're looking at may have been actually real soldiers that posed for some of the statues that were part of it. And it had something like 8,000 soldier statues that were part of it, 130 chariots, and maybe over 500 horses that were included as statues. So he may have had something like 8,000 to 10,000 statues or more that were constructed as part of it. And the actual tomb wasn't found until like the 1970s. I think 1974, the tomb was actually found by some local farmers in China near Xi'an. And so that's kind of why they know about the Terracotta Army. But terracotta is like a type of clay that they would use to make pottery out of, statues, things like that. And they say, like, the statues, like some are like lifelike, the size of human beings. And you notice, like, the hands, how they're kind of open. I think when they found some of the soldiers, they still had weapons in them, like swords in their hands, believe it or not. And so they were actually armed with weapons, some of them, and things like that. That's a big tourist attraction thing today. People want to go see the Great Wall, but a lot of people want to go see, of course, the famous Terracotta Army, of course, that's buried there, of course, originally. So here's other images, of course, of the Terracotta Army that he, of course, supposedly there was a deal where he buried some of the workers in it with when they constructed it. He didn't want to know, I guess, where it was built or whatever. So he's kind of secretive about this tomb originally when he constructed it in the 3rd century BC. Oh, and by the way, he was a harsh ruler. That's something I did want to talk about Qin Shi. If you know much about him, he's not exactly a popular ruler in China today. In fact, he's very brutal. He had this type of government he developed called legalism, which was like a type of authoritarian type political philosophy where they wanted a centralized government with a powerful monarch, like an emperor. And one thing about the Qin, they stressed punishing people over, say, giving rewards, which I think Confucianism was the opposite. Where under Confucianism, they would reward people rather than punish people. And so that's something that they were kind of famous for. And kind of further image right here, but they think that legalism was a type of political philosophy that developed in the 3rd century BC. And it was kind of this movement to destroy other philosophical movements like Confucianism. I think they tried to wipe out remember that 100 schools of thought we talked about? They were trying to destroy some of these other philosophies in the country. And one thing they did was they banned a lot of books that had to do with that or any kind of knowledge that was important. He banned books. He burned books. The only thing they kept supposedly was agriculture and medicine that you could study. You thought that was the only thing that was really important. And they even had a deal where they killed people that were Confucianists. I think it was a case where he may have taken some of them and buried them alive. And just horrible things like that he was known for. So he was kind of a brutal monarch. And of course, he forced everybody to build the Great Wall. That may have been built from like slave labor and things like that. And so that's part of why the Qin got overthrown. They were just too oppressive. And so the Han Dynasty later comes in and basically overthrows them because of that issue. That's the next thing we want to talk about, of course, is the so-called Han Dynasty that enters in at that point. The Qin is overthrown by the Han sometime at the end of the 3rd century. They do have, like, supposedly a deal where Qin Shi Huang had 2 sons that briefly reigned as emperors, not very long, but they were soon overthrown by the Han. And that man there, you see in that image, which I think he called Liu Bang or Liu Pang, he's often called. And he helped start what they call later the so-called Golden Age of China, which lasts 700-800 years in China, which is the peak, really, of Chinese culture between like the Tang up to like from maybe the Han to the Tang Dynasty is the time period usually of it. Peaks really around close to about the 9th, 10th century usually. One thing about the Han, it is the longest reigning dynasty in Chinese history, like imperial one, like ruled by emperors, which is close to about 400 years. The founder is a man named Liu Bang or Pang, as pronounced either way. And he was some kind of Chinese commoner. He came from the lower classes, and he rose up through like the Chinese armies as a general and eventually seized power close to about 206 BC. And here's kind of an image of him right here. He has another name. They later called him Gao Su or Ko Su is what they called him, which Ko Su, I think, was a kind of a nickname that meant either high founder or exalted ruler. I think it was a title or nickname that they called him after he was that died. So the Chinese dub him later. And one thing about the Chinese at that point, under the Han, they start bringing in Confucianism, which, for a long time had been rejected by the Chinese. And so you get this, idea of adopting state Confucianism into not just government, like, adopting, like, say, reforms in government, but also in society as well. And so they kind of rejected the whole brutal aspect of legalism. They kept the idea of a centralized like government with an emperor, but the brutal aspect where they were, punishing people, they kind of went away from that. And Confucianism kind of rewards people for doing good things rather than punishing you for doing bad things the most. You can see there too, besides being the longest imperial dynasty, also a lot of Chinese relate back to this dynasty. In fact, I'll talk about the Han Chinese, of course, and especially the name Han originated from the Han River, which is a river that's kind of in, I think, central China is about where it's located. You can also see in that slide, economic prosperity began. One thing about the Han, they're the ones that began to, build for, I guess, link up the Silk Road, that trade route on Asia that pushes westward towards like the Middle East and Europe. So the Silk Road is something that they began under their reign as emperors. They standardized a lot of the coinage throughout China as well. They'll later have paper money as well. And then also the Han are known for a lot of innovations, which I think the biggest thing they started doing is printing and making paper, like wood paper and things like that. Here's kind of a map showing you the Han Empire under the Chinese at the time. So you can see there that their population may have peaked at about 60 million people at one point. It peaks 206 BC to about 220 CE is the time period of it. And you can see how China expands. It conquers more of the southern part of China in the eastern part. It actually takes over Korea at one point. And then you can see that one of the main things that happens, of course, is it pushes westward into central western China towards the west, where the part of why that area, the western part you see in, that's where the Silk Road will go. It runs, east to west across northern China. And so that's part of why they defend that area, even extending the actual, Great Wall to the west as well. They rule from Chang'an, although it's still called Xi'an at the time. I'll get to it later. But the Tang Dynasty is the one that starts calling it Chang'an, which is one of its traditional names. It's called today. But Xi'an today, of course, I think is a city, or that metropolitan area in China right there has about 12 million people that live there today. I'll get to it later, but Chang'an, I told you, in the future is going to become eventually one of the first million people, city that'll be kind of forming at that time. But you can see the actual capital of Chang'an was on, or Xi'an as they called it back then, was on the Wei River, is where it's located. They do have another capital I'll talk about later that's also called Luoyang. It's located on the Yellow River to the east of Chang'an. So there's kind of an image of what will be, of course, Xi'an still, I guess, the name they're using, but Chang'an's the traditional name. They called it in the old days that you're looking at right there. But yeah, I'll kind of briefly talk about some of the other emperors that were kind of part of the Han. They had an emperor named Emperor Wu that reigned between the 2nd century and 1st century. That should be 141 to 87 CE there. Right there. Actually, it should be BC. It's a typo there. But he's the second longest reigning emperor in their history overall. Reigning between the second and 1st centuries BC. And I think his reign is something like, we could do the math there, 54 years is how long he was in power. And he was known for his expansionism. Is one thing he's very famous for. He kind of was sometimes called the military or martial emperor because under his reign, China began to, if you go back to this map here, they began to expand into different parts of China. From that map there, it's hard to see, but they would push down into the northern part of Vietnam at one point. Of course, southern China they conquered as well. They also conquered part of Korea, where North Korea is today. And they did push westward. That's one thing, that probably the most famous thing the Han did. They pushed westward into the Gobi Desert in western China, uh, where the Silk Road will be built. And they would, of course, extend the Great Wall further westward as they would do that. The one thing he is famous for, of course, this particular emperor, he is very famous for defeating the Xiongnu. So that's kind of his big thing, because the Han would kind of push them back, northward, back into the Mongolian steppe. And then from there, they'll begin to extend the Great Wall further westward, like I was talking about at that point. And that, as you can see there, of course, in that map there, they push them back. And so, yeah, the Xiongnu at one point were occupying that area we're discussing in that western part that the Han will take. And so under his regime, they'll conquer that area, you see, and push the Xiongnu back into Mongolia. That would help facilitate, the Silk Road being built afterwards. Of course, Silk Road was a famous trade network that ran from China westward into, linking up with India. And then you can see it pushed all the way into Persia and Mesopotamia, reaching at one point all the way to Constantinople, which will, of course, later be part of the Roman Empire. So they think that the trade networks of the Silk Road, something like between 4,000 and 5,000 miles in length. They even have, caravan routes that run down into like the Arabian Peninsula, and then, of course, also into North Africa, where all these different trade goods from Asia could be peddled, westward, of course, along the way. If you know about the Silk Road helped facilitate trade between China and the Roman Empire at the time. So I think the Byzantine Empire, note later, will eventually have silk or figure out silk itself, how to actually make it, and all that. And these are the kind of things that they, were pretty much came down the Silk Road toward the west. Besides silk, where it gets its name, also called Silk Route. I'll use that term as well. Gunpowder, of course, very famously, of course, goes westward. Paper, crossbow, the compass, pearls, glass, jade, tea, of course, definitely spices, and also diseases. I did want to mention that as well. But yeah, the Silk Road did kind of, they think, bring diseases to the West, especially like bubonic plague. I think as the Mongols pushed westward too, when they conquered that area, that helped to spread bubonic plague. And it's part of why the Black Death is real bad in the 14th century in Europe. By the way, silk for a long time was kind of secretive in China. If any foreigner tried to find the secret to it, they could put you to death for it. But they think by the Byzantine Empire in the Middle Ages, they figured out the secret to making silk. It's a mystery for a long time to some people, of course, but made from the silkworm. Here's some other things, of course, right here. The Han Dynasty is known for a lot of things that they invented. Of course, paper as being one of the main things that they invented. That was probably the most famous thing at that time. It was made by grinding plant fibers in the paste, and the paste dried in the sheets, and then they could make books out of it, scrolls, basically. And they had different kinds of printing. I think we study about the Han, they had some kind of printing called woodblock printing, it was called sometimes. So like early forms of printing where they would print things on paper, seals, stamps, things like that overall. So early printing, starting to kind of develop, but like the movable type printer, that'll be developed later in China, probably close to about maybe 1000 AD or whatever. a little later. Farming, iron plow, they think kind of came about that time. Wheelbarrow as well. So those are kind of things they invented for farming to make farming much easier, make it easier to till the land and things like that. Seismograph, they think may have been developed about that time. Acupuncture, which, something the Chinese are very famous for. The compass, they do think around the Han, the so-called compass, magnetic compass, is invented in China, which that'll have a major impact on navigation, ship navigation, especially in the West. Sundial, water mill, ship's rudder, those are things that they think may have been invented about that time in Han China. Although some of these may have been already invented in the West, or similar kind of inventions that were kind of out there overall. There was a period under the Han where there was a separation. They have this deal where a man named Wang Mang seized power. Emperor Wang Mang, you see on the right there. He was some kind of official that was under the Han Dynasty, and he overthrew the government and took power in 9 CE, 9 to 23 CE. And he ruled his own dynasty that was called the Zen Dynasty. It was nicknamed, but he only reigned for like 14, 15 years before they overthrew him. He was the only ruler of it. And then what happened was the Han came back in and they basically took power again. So the Han Dynasty is kind of divided into 2 periods. You got the so-called former Han or Western Han, you see there. And then you got the so-called later Han or Eastern Han. And the reason why they call it the Western and Eastern is that the Western Han, the capital was at Xi'an or Chang'an, as they traditionally call it later. And then they have another capital they have called Luoyang, I may have talked about before. And Luoyang was on the Yellow River east of Chang'an or Xi'an. And that's where they would rule from, the Han emperors from there, including this one here, Guangwu, who overthrew the Zen state that briefly took power. And the Han continued for another like 200 years after that. So that's the story kind of the Han, how they, developed as an actual dynasty. So that one is considered to be one of the most famous imperial dynasties, at least in ancient China, a long time ago. So here's kind of another image right here, kind of showing like the old Luoyang, which is right there. So China has had a lot of capitals. I want to say 5 capitals at one point that China has had here and there. I talked about some of them already, like Xi'an or Chang'an, Luoyang. Later, Peking or Beijing, of course, will be another capital. I think also Nanking, was a capital as well at one point in more modern China, though. Here's kind of a map here because I'm going to get to next. So they have a dynasty called the Sui Dynasty that later reigned briefly, which I think the Sui will come in for a short time period and reign, just for I want to say, I think they're around for like 30, 40 years as an actual dynasty. And the Sui kind of reigned in that same area where the Han were. And they reigned between like the 6th and 7th centuries CE is when they were around. Anyway, it's right there. I did want to get to the main thing today, which is the Tang Dynasty. The Tang reigned from 618 to 907 CE. So we're getting more up into like the end of the so-called Golden Age of China. It's called that, by the way, Golden Age of China, because that was the kind of peak period of like Chinese culture, art, literature, poetry back then. So it's like a high point in Chinese history at the time. And the Tang were kind of very known for a lot of its reforms, especially within its government. Confucianism pretty much had spread throughout the whole region of China. They perfected, you can see there, the imperial examination system to, basically select a lot of their actual bureaucrats. One thing about the Chinese that they're famous for, you may have heard about, a lot of their bureaucrats were often what they call eunuchs. You know what those were? Eunuchs. And eunuchs were like castrated males that they would have as officials that would run like the court and the government. They're usually deemed real loyal. They're even used as spies sometimes as well, eunuchs. But you can see other things too there. They had a liberal attitude towards all religions in China. You can see by the time of the Tang Dynasty, Buddhism has spread throughout China. I think they seem to think that Buddhism may have started spreading into China going back to like the first, second centuries. And then over time, around the Tang, Buddhism even starts spreading into nearby countries, into Japan, into Korea, Vietnam, and parts of Southeast Asia as well. So it's starting to kind of spread throughout the world. And you can see that the Tang were even kind of had some foreign relations with countries like Japan, Korea, of course, and then also Persia too, because they traded a lot with the West, like in Persia and India, etc. And so the Tang was basically, kind of important at the time. Kind of get to a little bit about the Tang, who kind of founded that ruler right there. You see Emperor Gao Su. He was the actual ruler that founded the state. If you know much about this, he overthrew what they call the Qin Dynasty, which was only around for I want to say close to about 40 years. Only had two emperors at one point that reigned under the Qin Dynasty. And he founded it. His real name was Li Wan, the so-called Li family, I think they called it. And he was later called Emperor Gao Su. And he would reign from 618 to 626 BC. And so he's kind of considered the one that would start the actual state of the actual Tang itself. We just see kind of a map of the Tang Dynasty of kind of what it looked like. So most of eastern China, they ruled, and then part of the western part where the Silk Road ran westward. Of course, like I said, they ruled from Chang'an, which, by the way, the Tang were the ones that basically called it Chang'an, which in Chinese it meant City of Perpetual Peace, was the nickname. The old name was Xi'an, which is now they use it. They call it now Xi'an or Xianyang today. And its population grew over time, like somewhere, I think, 1 to 2 million was the size of the city of Chang'an. So at one point, it was one of the largest cities in the world, first million-person city that they had. And supposedly it was a huge city. Like they say, the city that the Tang built was like 8 times larger than what it was under the Han Dynasty, going back several centuries. And it was something like 30 square miles in size. That's how large Chang'an was. And so that's where a lot of the emperors reigned from at one point throughout most of the reign. Although I think there was kind of, I'll get to later, a brief time where sometimes they reigned at Luoyang also as well. They had other rulers too. There was a ruler called Tai Song as well. He was considered to be like a co-founder of the Tang Dynasty that reigned also in the 7th century. I think a lot of their great emperors reigned between the 7th and 8th centuries. And they consider his reign to be kind of a golden age. In fact, Tai Song is considered to be one of the peak rulers of the whole Tang Dynasty at the time. And Tai Song was the son of the founder. Basically, the founder I talked about before, Gao Su of Tang. And under his actual reign, they would continue their expansion. That's one thing about the Tang. The Tang keep expanding westward towards like where I guess where the Turks are, Turkestan and that area in western China. And you can see all the territorial areas that they control at one point under the Tang: Korea, Vietnam, part of Mongolia, part of Russia. At one point, they kind of controlled, a little bit of Central Asia as well. So Tang are kind of expanding westward and northward as part of their actual empire at the time. They also, one thing about the Tang that's very famous, they had one of the only female rulers that they had in Chinese history. Only female empress they had. Her name is Empress Wu. She goes by different names: Wu Zetian or Wu Zhao. They called her, and she was actually the ex mistress and consort of Emperor Taisong, like under him. And evidently, she was real powerful as a figure, and she seized power. And she actually did not reign from Chang'an; she reigned from Luoyang, which was to the east of Chang'an, along the Yellow River. And at one point, she ruled for something like 30, 40 years over China. And they think it's under her reign that Buddhism starts to become popular throughout China. And she was also a major patronage, building like temples throughout China. And Confucianism pretty much had already spread too throughout China and began to spread also outside of China as well. So, yeah, we've got like a female ruler, and that's the only one they ever had, of course. But she's not considered actually Tang. But I think they call her, I think it's called the Zetian Dynasty or something like that, is what's usually dubbed. So she was kind of considered like a de facto ruler of the Tang in mostly around the late 7th centuries when mostly she lived. They have one more later I'll kind of mention, Emperor Xuanzong. He's another ruler who reigned in the 8th century CE. And he was the longest reigning Tang emperor, reigning around close to almost 44 years as a ruler. You can see 712 to 756 CE. And he's famous for a lot of things. They think he's the one that really builds most of the capital of Chang'an that we know of later. In fact, supposedly, I believe he was the one that called it Perpetual Peace. Like the nickname, the City of Perpetual Peace, is kind of coined by him. And so by the time of his reign, pretty much Chang'an has become like a city that's somewhere between 1 and 2 million. It's kind of debatable how big it was. I think some of the Chinese claim it was like 1.8 or 1.9 million or something like that, which we're not sure if that's actually accurate or not. But they do think it is one of the first million populated city in the world at the time. And, China's got a lot of people. I think the population was somewhere between 50, 60 million was how many people were in China at the time of the Tang. But the Tang would later decline. And China would actually break up for a while before it kind of reunifies again as an actual empire. So here's an image, of course, of Chang'an. We're talking about one of the main capitals at the time in Imperial China. Oh, another thing you see here that's real famous by the time of the Tang is the Grand Canal. They think that under the Sui and the Tang dynasties, the Grand Canal was starting to be constructed throughout China on its east coast, of course, which will connect basically the Yellow and the Yangtze rivers. If you know about the Grand Canal, it's like a type of intercoastal canal system, kind of like we have in Louisiana, like along our southern coast on the Gulf of Mexico. They built something like that too, which was mostly done to connect the Yellow River, which you can see, to the Yangtze River. So both these rivers try to connect them. And then you can see it also went up to where Beijing is as well, later one of their capitals. So that connected that whole eastern part of China. So they're able to connect all their major cities in. That was very important to trade, not just in going back to ancient medieval China, but also in modern China today as well. And I think the total length of the canal, if you want to know, they think it's like now close to about 1,100 miles in length, or if you want the kilometers, about 1,800 kilometers from north to south, right there. So yeah, it is a big part of their economy today, still in China. You can see how it connects all the different cities. Beijing in the north, all the way down to close where Nanking is, Yangzhou, Shanghai, and Hangzhou, and other cities that are down there. And you can see it then. It connects also to the Yellow River, where some of their major cities were, Dian or Chang'an, and then Luoyang also as well. Now, they do have later, I'll kind of get into it too. They have later dynasties that develop in China. I'll kind of briefly talk about, because kind of going into like medieval to modern China. But here's kind of a list of different dynasties they have in China, like in medieval, modern China. You have the Song or Sung dynasty that comes in the 10th century. China actually broke up at one point into like the so-called 10 Kingdoms period. I think they nicknamed it. And the Song reigned between about 300 years or so, 960 to 1279. And that dynasty was famous for reuniting China into like a empire again under one main emperor. And you can see they were known for a lot of innovations. They think that gunpowder was invented about that time in China. Also paper money. They started Chinese, I think, were one of the first to use paper money as well. And then also they built the first Chinese Navy in China, which doesn't do well later against the British. You know about that when the British come into China, etc. But later the Chinese do actually kind of explore. I know like around the 15th century, this happens later under the Ming Dynasty, but they explored parts of like the Indian Ocean. You can see also the movable type printing press was believed to have been invented close to about maybe 1000 CE. And so that's going to be an important invention that's going to lead to like printing a lot, especially in the West, when Johann Gutenberg kind of gets a version of it and develops it in Germany. That's in the 15th century, but that's something that kind of affects the West later. Then in the 13th century, you get the Yuan dynasty that takes over China. That was a Mongolian dynasty that reigned over China. This was caused by Genghis Khan. What happened was in the early 1200s, Genghis Khan and the Mongols attacked China from Mongolia and broke through the Great Wall and took over the whole all of China. I think half of China was wiped out. And of course, Genghis Khan went on to conquer most of Asia, if you know about that, and part of Europe. And so in the late 13th century, the Mongols formed their own dynasty over China called the Yuan dynasty. And the most famous emperor was Kublai Khan, who reigned kind of late 13th century. And so the Mongols reigned till 1368 before they were thrown out by the Ming, 1368. The Ming took over China. The Ming, of course, were known for throwing out the Mongols. And because of that, they were kind of concerned that the Mongols would try to invade again. And so they decided to build a better Great Wall. And so the Ming are the ones that built the main brick one that we see in a lot of images, the Great Wall of China today that are now around. It was mostly built around the 16th century when most was constructed. The Ming also moved its capital to Beijing, which Beijing is one of the main capitals of China throughout its modern times, maybe except for Nanking, might have been a capital at one point. But that's where they start building like the Forbidden Palace, where the emperors will kind of reign for something like almost 400 or 500 years. And then you have one more dynasty you have later, which is the Qing or Great Qing dynasty that took power in 1644. The Qing were actually Manchu, which were Manchurian peoples that were up in the northeastern part of China. They invaded China, got through the wall, of course, took it over. and they basically made the Great Wall obsolete after that, and they reigned till 1912 as emperors. But during that time, if you know about it, especially by the 19th century, China gets taken over by a lot of imperial powers like Britain, Japan, Germany, and other states, the French that come in, etc. And Britain has more control, I think, than anything. You know about that in China, and they even neutralized their military and start taking over ports like Hong Kong, etc. And so China declined as a power. The empire really wasn't that powerful. The last emperor abdicated in 1912. Then you have two republics later. You got the Republic of China, of course, 1912 to 1949. The Republic of China was founded by this man named Sun Yat-sen. You may have heard of him. There's a university named after him, too, in China, Sun Yat-sen University. Anyway, that particular republic will be around from 1912 up through like World War II, and then up to like the early part of the Cold War. Most famous ruler of it was Chiang Kai-shek, who was a Chinese politician and general. He reigned until 1949, until the communists took over the country in 1949. And then, of course, you have the last state they have now, which is the People's Republic of China, which is a socialist communist state founded by Mao Zedong. Of course, this is the current state that's in power, and mostly a communist-type government, of course, is in power today. Although its economy is more capitalist, if you know about China. And so that's the legacy of, China's history, how it kind of, evolved over time from, empires and dynasties and things like that over 3,000 years. And of course, now it's a republic. But obviously, if you look at images right there, you see the Great Wall, that's something that's a big tourist attraction in China. They're trying to preserve it, about that with the Great Wall. Because some parts of it are kind of falling apart, and they're trying to, make sure to preserve it and repair it and things like that. I think you'll see that in the documentary I'll kind of share this week also as well. Before I get going today, by the way, I have an announcement I can't show you right here, but yeah, I will have a bonus video quiz later in the week, which will be on, I'll kind of like be this documentary on the Great Wall. I'll kind of share with you on Wednesday. It'll be worth up to 30 bonus points, of course, toward the semester due next week. Of course, due like in, I think, close to that midterm week coming up. So no lecture, of course, planned for, for Wednesday this week. This assignment will be in like a short answer format, by the way. I think I do give you some extra time on it, like 20 minutes, because it is short answer. But you will be allowed 2 attempts on this particular assignment overall. Don't forget to, like I said, Canvas quiz on ancient India. That is due, of course. I think most of it's due this week. I know I might give you extra time on it coming up, but I know mostly it's due this week overall. So try to, get that wrapped up overall. So those are like your main assignments y'all know you'll have to work on right now coming up. And then like I said, next week, you got that second vocabulary you've got coming as well. By the way, good morning, Kayla. Hey, I kind of missed you there, of course, when you came in late. And Samantha, hey, what's going on this morning? And also looks like Avriel also was joining us. So happy Monday, of course, out there as well. So looks like no historical questions, I guess, today overall with this lecture. But like I said, no lecture Wednesday. Next week, I'll be moving on to talk about ancient Greece. So kind of get to that probably this coming next Monday, which should be like March 13th. I'll kind of get mostly into discussing the Greek Bronze Age, or what they call the Aegean civilization. And that's like civilizations like the Minoans you may have heard of, or Mycenaeans. Like you've heard the story of the Trojan War and all that. I'll kind of talk about that next week. For that lecture. So that's it for today. Like I said, if you have any comments, of course, about the class, you can always leave comments, of course, either on my channel or, of course, don't forget, you got, Canvas discussions. You can also email me if you got a question, of course, about the class as well, administrative wise, et cetera. So that's it. Y'all take care, and I'll see you, of course, later. So y'all have a great rest of the week.